So this is my Asus Zephyrus Duo GX550. This is the LWS model, so this is the i7-875 with an RTX 2070 Super. Now it has two 1TB NVMe's in RAID 0 from factory and 32 gigs of RAM, and this thing gets hotter than the surface of the sun. I'm trying to see if I can improve thermals. Now, this has liquid metal from factory. One of the things that I've noticed is that it only has liquid metal on the CPU. The GPU is still standard thermal compound. Right now, I'm running a custom version of Windows that I'm working on. I'm going to make a whole separate video on this version of Windows and how you can make it yourself if you want to run this version of Windows. Now, I just want to get that out of the way because this version of Windows doesn't have anything in it. Like, the only stuff that's installed is stuff that I use. When you first install this, it essentially has nothing in it. There's not even a web browser. Like, it also doesn't even have Windows Defender. There's nothing running in the background other than what you need. So it also gives you the best performance. Now, I feel like I have to explain that kind of disclosure, because what I'm doing is not going to be the same results that you'll get on a stock computer. So the numbers that you'll see here are going to be better than a stock Asus Zephyrus Duo, because of how many resources are being reserved on this version of Windows as opposed to a stock version, or even the heavily bloatware filled version that comes on this computer from factory. So with that being said, what we're after right now is the differences between the results, not necessarily the numbers themselves. Now, the first test that I want to run is going to be IDA64, and this is just going to be, your standard stress test. Oh, right, I have to plug the laptop in. Okay, so now that it's plugged in, fans have gone into like turbo mode, and we immediately started thermal throttling. Awesome. So I'm going to stop this test, and I'm going to let the battery fully charge, so that way charging isn't taking any sort of performance away from this, or the heat to the battery pack itself isn't skewing any results. So I'm gonna wait for this to get to 100%, and then I will start this test again. So I have everything ready to go, but like, this laptop runs ridiculously hot. Like, just at idle, we're over 50 degrees Celsius. I'm not doing anything. And this doesn't have anything in the background running because of this custom version of Windows. So this is better than what it would be out of the box. Okay, so I'm just gonna run this, and we'll see where the temperatures get to, and it immediately started thermal throttling at 22%. So this isn't looking good. Like, this laptop is just ridiculously hot. Like, you can hear it. And this is the balance profile from Windows. I'm not using any Asus software to control this. This is straight from Windows, so that way it's like a Microsoft controlled out of the box experience. There's no trickery with proprietary Asus software. So while that's going and there's ridiculous fan noise in the background to annoy you, I have Thermal Grizzly Conductinaut liquid metal. That's what I'm going to be putting on the CPU, so I'm going to be changing the liquid metal that's already on there, and I'm going to be using this same compound on the GPU. So this will have liquid metal on both CPU and GPU. Next, I have these little heatsink things that came off of my ADATA XPG Gamix S11 Pro NVMe's, which are in this computer here, but because it has the integrated heat spreader on the motherboard itself, I had to remove these. So I have a few of these kicking around, and I'm just gonna throw them on. Hopefully there's room, because this is a very thin laptop for how much power this thing packs. And I can stick those on and see if we get any kind of NVMe thermal changes at all. I'm not screen recording, just because it was gonna thermal throttle anyway, and screen recording is just gonna make that significantly worse. So that's it. I'm gonna let this run. I'll come back and we'll have the baseline reading before I do anything. So now we can stop that test, let it cool down, and I'm going to run all the rest of the benchmarks and just get all of the readings ready to go. So that way we have a full baseline of all the benchmarks that I'm going to be running. So to change the thermal compound on this laptop, we're obviously going to need liquid metal. When we put that on, we're going to need clear nail polish. Now you can use conformal coating, but it's ridiculously expensive. At least for what I found, it's like $50. These things are like $1. And then the heat sinks themselves for the NVMe's, if you wanted to put heatsinks on the NVMEs. Now, to take this apart, we're gonna need a number 0 Phillips head screwdriver, and that's only for this one screw in the corner, which is also a captive screw. It doesn't come out. Next, the rest of the screws are all going to be a Torx 5, and these are not captive, so they do come out. So you'll notice that these screws around the edges, these have red thread locker on them. So you can kind of see there the red thread locker. But these ones in the middle have blue thread locker. So it's worth keeping in mind because these are different length screws. So the shorter ones go in the centers. So now that all the screws are removed, the longer ones with the red thread locker go all the way around the outside. There's a single captive Phillips screw that doesn't come out in the lower right corner. And then these 5 screws right here are all shorter screws with blue thread locker. And now we literally just lift it right off. All right, we don't have any dust buildup at all, so that's good. Wow, it is like crazy how light that is. Now into the laptop itself, we have NVMe 1 and 2. So these right here, very simple application. We're just gonna take this heat spreader and we're just gonna stick it right on top, making sure that if we want to remove that screw in the future, we can. Now I'm just gonna kind of press that on there because it's just double-sided tape with the silicone heat pad on the other side. And we will do this one as well. Okay, and all of that is good. Now I just want to make sure this fits back on before going any further with that. And yeah, so both edges will go completely flush. There's no issues at all with anything rubbing, so that's good. So if you want to run NVMEs that have a heat spreader on them, then great, you can. Now, one downfall for this laptop is that the Wi-Fi card is right here. It's integrated into the motherboard. So that pretty much means that you can't upgrade the Wi-Fi at all. Even if you wanted to, you'd have to change the entire motherboard, and there isn't a motherboard for this model that has faster Wi-Fi than what's in it. So you're basically screwed. You have no upgrades at all. This little metal bracket right here will actually push forward, and then this pulls straight up, just like this. Now the battery is disconnected, everything is safe, and we have to take off this giant heatsink, which you can see there is actually a little tiny bit of dust there. Okay, it's actually kind of crazy because it didn't occur to me until after I was doing this that I have had this laptop for exactly 1 year as of yesterday. So this laptop right now has been in my possession for 366 days, at least at the time of recording this video. When it goes up, who knows when I'll ever do that, so it could be significantly longer. But for the time being, it's actually really clean in here, aside from the thermal compound, which we'll get into. So back to the number 0 Phillips. Can start taking these fan screws out. There's one up here by the hinge, then over to this one right here with a little ground strap on it, and then again up here by the hinge. This little shield out of the way. Don't need to take it off completely, but just enough that it's moved. And then we can get to these screws, which you want to loosen evenly. Oh my god, why is that so tight? What the hell, Asus? So I'm gonna try with the number 1. Try and get more bite on the screw. Okay, I got it. Jesus Christ, man, that's ridiculous. Okay, let's get this one. Okay, got that one. Oh my god, this is scary. I'm pressing so hard I can see it flexing. Here, all right. Oh my god. Watch my screen be broken after this. Okay, now we have this little don't touch this, otherwise your warranty's void nonsense. So that's cool. So we can pop that off. And it actually came off in one piece, so it didn't even do its job. That's neat. And the last screw right here, just gotta crack that loose. Oh my god. There's no reason those need to be that tight. That's insane. Anyway, now that they're all loosened up, we can just go one at a time, start doing a couple turns, always crossing direction, far from each one as possible. So that's everything. There's gonna be a fan connector under here somewhere, another one right here. So we will probably have to pull this up and over. So let's try and pull this up, I guess. It's a scary, this display cable. Let's try and take that out. Okay, there we are. That's good. There's no other screws anywhere that I can see. Why is this so hard to remove? Probably just the thermal pads. Okay, so let's get these antennas right here. Push that right back in. The cables are not in the way. And I guess let's just try and pry it out or something. I have no idea how to get this out. So that's kind of loose right there on the chips. This one is stuck, so it's 100% the thermal pads. That's what's holding this on. Wow, this is really on there. Okay. I pried up right here to get my finger in here, and then I moved this stick further until it came through, until it was by this heating pipe, and I pried up there and I was able to get it. So now we need to get these cables out of the way, and this one, and now just kind of flip that around, unplug this fan, pulling it straight back, and this one right here, and just pulling it straight back. Perfect. Got it. Anyway, we got the heatsink off, and you can see the liquid metal right here, and the regular thermal compound that they used right here, which is completely solid. So that's why it wasn't working. Awesome. And you can also see that the liquid metal has leaked out. Wow, that's terrifying. Okay, these like thermal pads are also completely melted. I'm not sure if these are actually thermal pads or if they used a thermal compound, because this almost looks like compound because they're little round areas. I mean, a thermal pad could deteriorate like that, but this looks more like compound than a thermal pad. Basically means that I can't measure it if it's compound, so I don't know what thickness of thermal pads to buy. But just judging by the look of it, it's super thin. Like there are areas right here where the chips were actually making contact and touching. So I'm going to assume that this is thermal compound. Because like right here, you can see where it's pulled apart and it's still like a liquid almost. And right here, it had full contact. That's like the bare chip, that was full contact. I don't think using thermal pads would be a good idea. So I'm gonna change this with Thermal Grizzly Cryonaut. I'm gonna clean this up, which is still very liquidy. So that's good, although very concerning because look at how far that got out. Like that's on this outer shielding like that almost went out onto the motherboard. That's crazy. Anyway, I'm gonna clean all of this up, and the CPU and the GPU will have Conductonaut, and the rest of the components will have Cryonaut. So just for fun here, just this compound. It's just coming off in chunks. Like that's only a year old and it's just flaking off in giant pieces. Why did they not liquid metal the GPU? I don't know. Just for the sake of continuity, I'm not going to clean this despite how much that's going to drive me nuts, because I want this to be assembled exactly the same way that I took it off. So the only differences that we're going to see is from new liquid metal and I guess thermal compound on these. Taking the dust and the fans completely out of the equation, so that way we're actually comparing only the stock liquid metal and stock thermal compound to Thermal Grizzly's solutions. Everything is all cleaned off, and just out of curiosity I took the fans off to investigate the heatsink, and it's really not that bad. So the top of the fans is pretty much the worst of it, so I'm just going to clean them because that's not going to do anything for the test results. Now one thing I did notice was kind of interesting. There's like an etching in the chip, but it's not. It can come off. I just lightly rub against it and you can hear it. I don't know what that is, but it's also on the heatsink. So I'm not sure if that is pitting, which it doesn't look like it because it does come off, or if that's just something in the actual liquid metal that they used that wasn't soluble. Like it ended up turning into an alloy and it absorbed some kind of material, because those are solid pieces, and it was on the chip itself and on the heatsink. But now what I'm going to do is take the clear nail polish and I'm going to put a tiny little bit in these corners right here just to make sure that nothing goes through, because it did seep and there was a fair buildup on this corner, and if that gets underneath this little capped on cover that goes over this, that would be really bad. So I'm also going to do the same here. I'm going to put the clear nail polish as kind of like a border all around here, and then I'm going to put that capped on cover back on and then just kind of seal off the corners where it could leak underneath, and hopefully that will be good. And one thing that you kind of really have to take into consideration is you need to let this stuff dry for a long time, because it is flammable. So if it gets too hot, when it's not cured, it'll light on fire. You just get a tiny bit along the edge here. There's a nice thin layer over the entire thing. This capped on cover back on. Press it in place lightly kind of dot the corners. Now I can just wait for it to dry and clean up the edges. You got everything masked off. Nail polish is cured. I took the razor blade and I scraped across to take any nail polish that was actually on the die itself. So now everything is completely smooth, completely cleaned. I wiped it all down with alcohol. I've been holding this in my hand to warm it up because you can work it in better when it's warm. And we just have to very carefully get a tiny little dot of this out. And then another tiny little dot on this one. Grab one of these, and now we just want to work it in. Make sure that we have a good solid coating all the way across. Now I'm just going to keep working it back and forth just to make sure that it's completely even all the way across. Essentially just playing with it. Now we can do this one. Now we can just work it in. Because I have this little template and I marked out the holes, all I have to do is carefully take this off. Now we can move on to the heatsink. Just rip this in half. Alright, and because the holes are in the same place, there we are. And we can do the exact same thing for this side right here. Now I had to rip it because it was up before because this is offset. So now I can just line that up right there. There we are. Now we can just start rubbing liquid metal into this right here. That way we have a good coating on both sides. And that is exactly where the die is. Time for the cryonaut. Just looking at the heatsink here, I have this raised area which is going to go down, so that's going to be on these right here. Then up here, these ones, then right here is going to be right down here on these two black ones, right in the middle on the two gray ones, and then right here all the way around the edge are all of these chips here. That is what I have to cover. Okay, so that's the start, and I'll just do the rest. And then I'll test fit to make sure it actually makes contact with all of this. Because if there's no thermal compound on any portion here, then there's not enough here. So everything's back in, everything's on, cables are tucked, everything's plugged in. Cool, I'm not gonna screw anything else in yet. I'm just gonna put this cover on. And then I can test it. Everything's working. So the idle temperature is sitting at 42 degrees, 41. So we actually dropped 10 degrees Celsius on the CPU. Wow. I'm going to put the rest of the screws in, finish this all up, and then I will run all the benchmarks, and then we'll come back when it's all done. Okay, so I just got to the end of editing this video, and I never actually, finished the video. So I did write everything down for all of the results. So we can run through them now. And from the time of recording that video till now, it's been almost a month. And this thing has been running flawless. I haven't had a single issue with it at all. The Wi-Fi issue that I was having is completely gone. So the Wi-Fi being super slow was completely just a result of the temperatures. It was keeping the internal case so hot that the Wi-Fi card was overheating. So now, because it was thermal throttling, I also took note of the frequency that it was running at. So in its completely stock configuration, with the 1-year-old thermal compound, just as this thing came out, literally 1 day after the warranty expired, we had 85 degrees Celsius on the CPU at 2.2 gigahertz. The GPU temperature was at 83.8 degrees Celsius with a clock speed of 1,530 megahertz, and memory clock was 1,375 megahertz. Now the temperature on the two NVMEs was 60 degrees Celsius on one and 57 degrees Celsius on the other. Now I'm not sure which one of which was the hotter one, but I'm going to assume that the one next to the memory was the hotter one because they're almost touching. And I guess we'll turn this on just so you got something to look at, and we'll come to the benchmarks in a second, but first I want to look over the thermals that I got using Conductinaut on the CPU and the GPU and Cryonaut on everything else. Because after the thermal compound mod that we just did, the CPU is running at 70 degrees Celsius at 2.4 gigahertz. So not only was it running cooler, but it also ran at a higher clock speed. And then on the GPU, 66.1 degrees Celsius with a clock speed of 1,755 megahertz and the memory clock at 1,405 megahertz. So again, the GPU ran cooler and it had a faster clock speed. And then for the NVMEs, it is exactly 10 degrees less on both of them at 50 and 47. Already, the thermals completely taken care of. The fact that they didn't put liquid metal on the GPU literally goes to show that this laptop has been being held back its entire life so far. It is like having a brand new laptop. I cannot believe how much of a difference this made, even that this had liquid metal on the CPU. I literally took it off and I put the thermal grizzly stuff on and I dropped 15 degrees. And I even showed inside, like there was a little bit of dust on the fans, but nothing really protruding out into the blade itself. And even in the heatsink, there was basically nothing stuck in it. There was like a few little pieces, which aren't going to do anything. Like at most, maybe 1 degree difference. Like I cannot believe how well this laptop runs just by going from whatever factory liquid metal compound that's on this just to the Thermal Grizzly Conductanaut compound. And like, this is not a sponsored video by Thermal Grizzly at all. I just like their products. I've been using Cryonaut for a long time now, and it's my go-to. Like, I love it. A perfect example that even though this laptop comes with liquid metal, not all liquid metals are made equally. And then for that GPU difference, that's outstanding. So now we can actually get into the benchmark results. So now comparing on the stock configuration, Cinebench was 7,411. With the Thermal Grizzly compounds, 7,557. Then we move over to the stock configuration with Geekbench 5. Single core was 1,294. Multi-core was 7,958. And then with the new compounds, single core was 1,315. Multi-core was 8,025. And then looking at 3D Mark, stock was 7,291. With the new compounds, 7,338. Now, if I had tested more games, I probably would have had a more broader difference here, but in a stock configuration, Forza Horizon 5, 54 frames per second on extreme settings, everything completely maxed out. With the new thermal solution, 55. So I got 1 frame per second more. And I also ran both of those tests twice just to make sure it wasn't some kind of fluctuation. So I did gain 1 frame per second. And lastly, Crystal Dismark, which was the kind of unicorn thing in here, which I really didn't think was going to do anything at all. But just given that the temperatures are lower, I don't know if that's because like the internal volume of the computer is running cooler, or if those little heat sinks are actually dissipating enough heat into the bottom chassis, because after looking a little bit closer, they are actually touching the bottom of the chassis. So those heat sinks are pushing on the NVMe and then pushing down on the bottom of the chassis, technically making thermal transfer to the metal of the bottom of the laptop, which is probably kind of going into why there was a 10 degrees Celsius drop on the NVMe's. Like that in combination with a lower internal chassis temperature. Even there was an improvement. In the stock configuration, the read speed was 3,407 megabytes per second. The write speed was 3,331 megabytes per second. But even if we look at the Thermal Grizzly compounds, the read speed was 3,464 megabytes per second, and the write speed was 3,347 megabytes per second. So those are within margin of error, but no matter how many times I ran the test afterward, I could not get a score that was lower than the score that I was getting before. So the results don't really matter that they are better, just because they're so close. It's really not a huge difference. In like a scientific test, there are improvements. Not to say that this is a scientific test, but in all of the measurements that I'm able to control here, I saw an improvement in every single thing. And when I was running this, I was not running it on the cooling mat, just to make sure that it was only the laptop's cooling capabilities, with no other assists at all. So now there's 3 big things that you want to take in from this. Well, I guess kind of 4. So the first one is that the computer is running a lot cooler. Every single thing that I tested has a significant drop in temperature. The second thing is that all of the components are going to last a lot longer and perform better because of the temperature difference. They're not literally sitting in their own created oven. It also means that you're going to have extended battery life because nothing is going to be taking tons of power, because a cooler component is going to be drawing less power, which also means that the fans are going to be running at a lower RPM, so again, using less power. So you're going to gain battery life with this. And I guess the fourth thing is that it's not going to be uncomfortable to hold because of how hot it is. Now, it does still get extremely hot. Like, it's still uncomfortable to hold. But it's significantly more tolerable than it was. And the fans, well, you can't even hear them because the ceiling fan is literally going louder than this, because I can't turn that light and the fan off separately. Considering that you can't hear this laptop, perfect. Like, it couldn't be any better. This is how it should have come out of the box, honestly. They went through the effort to do liquid metal, and then they just cheaped out on probably like some ridiculous bulk supply of the cheapest liquid metal they could find, just so that they could have in advertising that they use liquid metal. But realistically, liquid metal compounds are not made equally, which we've clearly just seen here with a 15 degrees Celsius drop between the stock stuff from Asus and Thermal Grizzly Conductanon. And then even using Cryonaut on everything else that's in there significantly dropped temperatures all the way across everything that was tested. I don't know. If you have one of these, or any laptop really, this is definitely worthwhile to do. It's very risky with leaking, so make sure you use like a conformal coating or nail polish. Just make sure to let the nail polish fully cure before doing this. I couldn't be happier with the results that I received here. Like, I did not think that the CPU was going to have such a substantial drop. This feels like a new laptop to me. It's running quieter, it's faster, the battery life is better. Like, every single thing has been improved for what I actually use this laptop for. I don't know. Hopefully you got something useful out of this. Like the video if you liked it, dislike it if you didn't like it, that's cool. You can join the members program if you want to help support these, well, I guess adventures. I was going to say stupid things that I keep buying because I usually keep buying really stupid things for no reason, but realistically, this was money well spent. Thermal Grizzly makes some really good products. Again, not sponsored. Kind of wish it was, because I'm fully behind this. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, or, you know, don't do any of it. I'm not telling you what to do.